Ladies and gentlemen, could you kindly take your seats? We are going to start shortly. And please do not have any mobile phones which ring during the session. The thematic working group on gender equality and empowerment of women. To begin, we will start with a short video, Gender Equality Means Empowering Women and Girls. It is now my pleasure to invite Madame Shamshad Akhtar, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to make her opening remarks.
Excellencies, distinguished members of the diplomatic community, our representatives, permanent representatives and their colleagues, and a lot of UN family that seems to be here. Um, I would like to warmly welcome you to this 2017 Asia Pacific commemoration of International Women's Day. I was this morning on an energy, low carbon event which has been organized by Thailand, and I was struck very much by the fact that they were all black suited men on that platform. Very few women, and of course no one in my lighter color dress. And I couldn't resist by starting my intervention by wishing all the Asia Pacific women the best, and also with very few women there, and also making the point that the low carbon future holds promise for women, as they are definitely disproportionately impacted by the environmental issues and, of course, lack of energy excess. So in that spirit, I'm really delighted that at least we are having a conversation with more women in this room than that huge room that I just came from. I think there must have been some conspiracy by those who made this video to actually take all the punch out of my which I thought were factually going to be hard hitting, but it's summed up so well in a short manner here that I want to compliment those who have made this video. But most of all, I'd like to state that the Secretary General has said it all. And to quote him from his recent statement, he said, women's rights are human rights. And I said, that's it, one doesn't need to go beyond that. The future prospects, of course, of Asia Pacific are linked to how we manage women's rights, which require accelerating and progressing on gender equality front. We must recognize that economic growth over the past several decades, while lifting millions of people out of poverty, has not translated into changing the lives for women, or for that matter, empowering women in the region. There has been improvement, but there are still very depressing elements there. Most of all, there's multiple disparities which continue to confront and haunt women and girls, and justice is hard to come by for women. I can't tell you so many stories from the developing countries of women who have not been able to see any light given the violence, the inheritance issues and others that they face, because the judiciary is not very women-friendly, as I see. Let me offer some insights on the magnitude and dimension of disparities in our region. First, I think you all know perhaps that the most concerning trend is that women are still not able to fully exercise their rights to decent work and full and productive employment. In Asia Pacific, we in fact see worsening female labor force participation, with the female to male ratio in labor having decreased from 0.67 in 1990 to 0.61 in 2016. In some sub-regions, it's more depressing participation rates. Second, occupational segregation favors men for jobs in high productivity, high growth sectors. Women tend to be concentrated in agriculture. For instance, 3/4 of women in South Asia are employed in agriculture. There are wage differentials there too, and are increasingly employed more and more in the services sector. Where women are employed in manufacturing, they tend to be concentrated in stagnating industries such as garment production or the likes. Third, women shoulder a disproportionate burden of unpaid care and domestic work, which limits their available time and economic choices. In some countries in the region, women engage in 10 times as much unpaid work as men. Fourth, women are consistently paid lower than men for work of equal value. The gender pay gap in the region is 20%, increasing to 30+% in some countries. Many women still face restrictions in access to and control over economic resources, including property, assets, and credit, as well as have low ownership of agricultural land. For example, although women entrepreneurs own and operate some 54 million enterprises within ASEAN countries, these are mostly small and micro enterprises in the informal sector, offering limited growth potential and few decent work opportunities. These entrenched and pervasive inequalities are significant barrier to realizing not just SDG 5 on gender equality, but the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda as a whole. It seems to me would be at risk unless we reverse some of these factual details that I have presented. So having dealt with some startling statistics on disparities, let me now turn to the rapidly changing, what we call the world of work and its potential implications. On a positive note, combination of globalization, technological and digital revolution offers newer opportunities, and I'm hoping that that will open new doors for women. It can't be taken for granted, though. A recent study by the World Economic Forum estimates that 65% of children entering primary schools today will ultimately work in new job types and functions that currently do not exist. Of course, this is going to result in a number of complications, even though it's positive. However, there is a growing concern that technological and digital innovations run the risk of leaving women further behind. The increased automation of production processes will lead to a sizable loss of low-skill and even middle-skill jobs where women currently predominate in the field of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, where jobs are expected to be created. Women will gain only one job for every 20 jobs lost in other areas, compared with one job for every 4 jobs lost for men. So the disparities could get aggravated also. Furthermore, it has to be recognized that informal economy has come to dominate the world of work, and it is more sizable in parts of Asia. Trends across the region show that women are overrepresented in informal employment, in the lowest paid jobs, in piece rate, subcontracted work, and in insecure forms of self-employment with a lack of social protection and labor rights. In one of our most populous countries in the region, India, some 120 million women, or around 95% of all women in paid work, are in informal activities. These trends enhance risks of unstable livelihoods and incomes and environmental impacts, all of which can further deepen existing gender inequalities and complicate our path to achieving sustainable development goals. Alongside these challenges, migration is changing the context of labor mobility, particularly of women. Of 231 million migrants around the world, approximately 60 million are in the Asia Pacific. Migrant women are often left with little choice but to take up low-paid, precarious jobs in the informal economy exposed to multiple risks. Taking action to achieve equality in the world of work requires transformative measures to ensure women's economic empowerment. ESCAP remains committed to working with its partners on gender equality as an integral part of delivering on the 2030 Agenda in Asia Pacific. To address the rights and needs of women in the changing world of work, ESCAP is supporting its member states in a number of ways. ESCAP, of course, in collaboration with UN Women, which is our closest partner in this, recently convened the Asia-Pacific Policy Dialogue focused on bridging gender gaps in women's labor force participation, entrepreneurship, pay, and working conditions. We also have been engaged in ensuring we discuss the provision of women's workers with comprehensive social protection and income security, and deliberating on how we look into guaranteeing men and women's equal access, ownership, and control of land, property, and other assets and resources. Alongside, of course, equal rights to inheritance, which are completely denied in the rural environment. To foster an enabling environment for women's entrepreneurship, ESCAP has been working with stakeholders to promote the access of women entrepreneurs, working with stakeholders to promote the access of women entrepreneurs to financial services, credit technology, market innovation, and networks, while addressing discriminatory social norms and ensuring gender responsive policies in enterprise development and promotion. ESCAP's Women ICT Frontier Initiative, or Wi-Fi, which I'm very proud of, that I have sponsored at our regional institute called APCTT, APCICT, sorry, in Incheon, is being launched across the region at sub-regional and national levels. Had I stayed, my target was that we should reach 100,000 women, but I do know that changes could distract us from the path, but I know that APCICT is very committed and Korean government is very supportive of this initiative. ESCAP is also leading a task force to develop an analytical publication on women's transformative leadership, including in the world of work. Let me conclude by making the point that women are, of course, the most powerful agents of change. So it is no brainer to understand that empowering women benefits whole society and can contribute to a substantial increment in our gross domestic products. Without addressing women's rights and economic empowerment, the vision of the 2030 Agenda will not be realized. We must confront discrimination and disempowerment of women that uses culture, tradition, and outdated values, policies as a justification for not acting. On the occasion of International Women's Day, let us reflect on, of course, the positive progress that has been made so far. But in interest of time, I spend more time as an economist talking about economic issues, for which I apologize, but I'm sure there are more imaginative speakers here. But I would like to, I'd like to hope that with this International Day, we can commit ourselves to ensuring that at least whatever we do, we contribute our voice to the cause of women and basically work towards protecting and promoting the rights of every woman and girl in Asia-Pacific region, which is known for its success stories. Of course, there are gaps in there, but hopefully our region will step up to the plate given the new momentum by the 2030 agenda. So thank you for being here, and I know you all have kindly agreed to serve as panelists, some of you, but I hope that there would be also a bit of a lively debate after that where you could share your own experiences. Thank you for being here, and in particular, thank you to the men for being here.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary, for your insightful comments and the delineation of a clear course of action to achieve gender equality. I hope you will excuse me for being a man, although I'm wearing a colourful shirt at least. Now we welcome Ms. Miwa Kato, who is the Regional Director of the UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, to make her statement.
Good morning, and first of all, let me say, please, all the men in the room, please don't at all feel that it is not a place you shouldn't be. In fact, we've been advocating for, at least for a couple of years, women's empowerment is very much everybody's business. So it is great to see probably half of the people in the room being men. It is very much a part of our UN's campaign on he for she, to say that, of which we have, I think, many he for she champions in the room as well, that we move on from a time only women talks about women's rights. So thank you very, very much. Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, civil society and private sector representatives, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, I would like to extend a warm welcome on this very special day for all of us, which is the International Women's Day. And I would like to begin by thanking Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, and the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, with which we have an excellent collaboration, and I would like to extend our gratitude from UN Women for the great regional collaboration we are very proud of. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is Women in the Changing World of Work. This is very much coincided with the theme of the CSW, the Commission on Status of Women, which would begin in New York as of next Monday. And one of the reasons I think we focused on this issue is that while we look at various manifestations of problems arising from lack of women's rights and lack of gender equality, we notice that one part that will be very transformative in all the work we do, from ending sexual violence against women, from various side of women's empowerment issues on health, on education, and various other parts where many of the UN agencies and civil society organizations present here today work on. At the end, women who are not empowered in a way that they can make their own living and to have a licit and respected way of earning income very often have very little choice over their fate. And this is very much the thought behind focusing on the area of work. The world of work in Asia Pacific, our region, is changing in significant ways. It's marked by innovations, especially in the digital and information and communication technologies, and in the increasing informality and mobility of labor. While the world of work is changing, structural barriers to gender equality and gender-based discrimination is persisting within and across the countries and require priority attention to strengthen the foundations for women's economic empowerment. As witnessed in a number of countries, participation of women in labor force has either fallen or stayed stagnant at a very low level around the world. If we look at this region, as Executive Secretary has also discussed, on average, female labor force participation declined in the East Asia region from being 71% in 1994 to only 63% in 2014. If we look at South Asia, it went from 36% to 31% over the same period of time. In Southeast Asia and the Pacific, it has remained at the same rate, but rather stagnant at the low rate of 59%. So gender gap in labor participation is persisting despite significant economic growth in many of the countries of our region, a lot of concern over decreasing fertility rates in some of the countries of our region, and also despite significant progress in gender equal education. So it is not for the lack of education that people cannot participate in the economy. And this is a point where we need to recognize and make extra efforts to link the progress we have made for many women in our region to have access to education, to be able to move into a world of work. Underutilization of the half of the labor force is resulting in economic losses, and it reduces the potential growth rates of an economy. It seriously affects productivity, which is essential to economic growth and sustainability that we all need. Women are systematically paid less than men for work of equal value across the countries and sectors of our region. The gender pay gap, as it was referred to earlier as well, is 20% in East Asia and the Pacific, and 33% in South Asia. Also, there's the dimension of unpaid care work. Across our region, too many women and girls spend too many hours of the day on household responsibilities, typically more than double the time spent by men in the same family, men and boys. In many cases, this unequal division of labor is at the expense of women's and girls' ability to put in learning, paid work, engagement in civic or community leadership, leisure, rest, and even sleep. This is the unchanging world of unrewarded work, as we would say, and withered features where girls and their mothers sustain the family with free labor, with lives whose trajectories are very different from the men and boys of that same household. This makes the norm where women and men are positioned in the economy and in society, of what they are perceived to be skilled or able to take on, and what work, if any, they will have. So obviously this is disadvantaging women and girls in a way that is not productive for anybody. At the same time, women make up a large portion of the vulnerable employment group of people who are in very vulnerable situations even when in employment. With precarious and unsafe working conditions, such as migrant workers, manufacturing, domestic workers, informal workers, and workers in agriculture and certain type of manufacturing industries. Women remain concentrated in lower earning segments with lower tenure, lower pay, fewer entitlements, greater insecurity, and exposure to violence and harassment. In East Asia and the Pacific, excluding China, 78% of women are in informal employment, with over a third that are in informal agricultural self-employment. Women migrant workers, who are nearly half of global and Asia-Pacific labor migration, are among the most vulnerable group of workers. Women's migrant work is largely low-skilled and low-paid, with a significant amount being in the domestic work and care sector. The gender-based barriers and restrictions on women's migration put women at risk of irregular migration and maltreatment. If women are to realize their potential gains from increased trade and economic integration, these barriers also need to be removed. We have discussed, I think, in one of our last sessions when we got together, a finding we did with the ASEAN Secretariat, where we looked at the dynamic growth projected in the ASEAN economic community, that if things were not changed from the way it is today, not only would women not be able to take advantage, the same advantage of economic growth and advantage foreseen by the ASEAN economic integration, but actually the gender gap would even increase. This was the theme of one of our earlier discussions last year, and a very shocking one applicable to many countries of our region, that economic growth in itself does not at all ensure that women can benefit from the same economic growth that's affecting the countries at the aggregate level. So there's clearly something that needs to be done, especially in the sphere of economy. The gender gap in the world of work are rooted in historically unequal power relations between women and men in the household and in the economies more broadly. They are also a result of gender-biased design and impacts of macroeconomic, fiscal, monetary, and trade policies, discriminatory laws and social norms, and greater constraints on women in balancing work and family responsibilities. I'm not even going to spend a lot of time on a topic that deserves a huge attention, which is violence against women in the world of work, which is very much a topic that we need to look at, because not only because women shouldn't be victims of violence, period, but also of its negative impact that it has on economic and business environment. We want to construct a different world of work for women. As they grow up, girls must be exposed to a broad range of careers. They should see role models, not only in societies, but also in families, of empowered women who's able to make their choices and also stand up to change the norms that's good for girls and boys. And to be encouraged to make choices that leads them to a life beyond the traditional service, care, and low-scale career options, if any, to decent and sustainable job in the industry, arts, public service, commercial agriculture, private sector, entrepreneurship, law enforcement, technology, and science, just to name a few. Women's economic empowerment requires transformative and structural change. And all too often, we're talking about this topic as a women's rights issue. It is, of course, a women's rights issue, but it goes way beyond this. And this is why it's so encouraging for us to see so many people in this room today that really takes us beyond the traditional converted people who are bought into women's rights issues. Because it's really about every other decision we make in the society, in governments, in families, in communities, that affects women and girls. Our region in the Asia Pacific is faced with increasing pressure and challenges, including the concentration of wealth in fewer hands, a regression of women's rights in some countries, competing priorities and emerging crises, such as climate change and its related disasters. Urgent policy action and innovative measures are required to overcome these barriers and ensure women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work. Women's economic empowerment requires, above all, political will of everybody and partnerships to develop and implement policies that integrate gender equality perspectives in labor institutions and programs at every level, local, national, and global. It requires enhanced and innovative interventions to tackle persistent gender inequalities and gaps in the world of work, and step up attention to technological and digital changes to ensure that they become vehicle for women's economic empowerment, not another factor that disadvantages women and girls over men and boys. Growing and emerging areas such as green economies and climate change mitigation and adaptation also offer new opportunities for decent work for women. So we should make sure we make these linkages. The Commission for Status of Women, which, as I mentioned, starts next week, its 61st session, is very committed to looking at ways to advance women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work. From this region, as the Executive Secretary has mentioned, we have a strong representation going to New York, and we were very proud to be able to host regional level preparatory sessions where a lot of different realities across Asia-Pacific countries were discussed, and at the same time, certain common factors were able to be discussed so that there's a voice bringing the needs, challenges, but also opportunities for progressive action to be brought from this region to the Commission on Status of Women. In so many ways, when we look at global level debates, Asia Pacific is seen to be the region that should be driving these changes. Relatively speaking, this region has high economic growth. It has a lot of shining factors that other regions dream of. So let's make sure that those actual factors factor in a way that it will also benefit women and girls. It's much easier to do this than to try to do this in settings and regions where there is very little prospect for economic growth. So let us please try to look into this, and I am confident that with the very good preparatory session that ESCAP and UN Women was able to organize earlier this month, the voice of Asian Pacific countries in the Commission would be heard. And all this comes at a moment when the international community has made an unprecedented commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. UN Women, together with UN partner agencies and civil society and various colleagues present in the room and beyond, will be mobilizing around the theme of women's economic empowerment with key steps to make sure that transformative change for working women in Asia and the Pacific region would be a reality leading up to the 2030 50-50 moment. I will stop here as there are many rich discussions that we expect from the interactive panel discussion, but only to say that we're very, very grateful to have this opportunity to look at the focus on what we all can do by focusing on economy, which everybody needs to succeed. That we frame the discussion of women's rights and gender equality issues in the context of what we all need, men, women, old and young, smaller countries, bigger countries. We all need to have a sustainable growth. And so much of our fate depends on healthy, sustainable growth of our economies and societies. Women, in fact, of course, can be saved in the process, women who have a lot of difficulties today. But also, as the Secretary General has said on the occasion of International Women's Day, women are also part of the missing solution to so many of the problems that we have in the world today. So if we can listen to the interactive panel today and also share thoughts on how this could be done in the unique context of our very vast but important region of Asia Pacific, it would be a great honor for us at UN Women to be able to support in our everyday work 365 days, rest of the year, to work with you on making sure that the goals that we confirm today becomes a reality for a greater number of women and girls, and through them, the societies in this region. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kato, for shedding light on a wide array of challenges and also putting forward a series of innovative solutions to address these issues. We now come to our interactive dialogue. This is on women in the changing world of work, Planet 50-50. There's an additional bit there, which says, and the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This session will be moderated by Her Excellency Ms. Saida Muna Tasneem, who is the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Bangladesh and the Permanent Representative to ESCAP. So I welcome her and all our panelists to come forward for the interactive discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations and a happy International Women's Day. Congratulations to all the women and the men in this room and all over the world, because we are once again celebrating International Women's Day. And I'm truly privileged because I've been asked to moderate a panel discussion, which is, I'm told, will be the heart of this celebration or the observation, where we get 5 very eminent and accomplished women and men, and there's quite a bit of gender balance on this panel, and who are accomplished in their own fields, and they will be making their personal and professional comments based on their real life experience, their work experience, on how we can bridge the gender gap and empower women economically, politically. The theme of the 2017 International Women's Day, Women in the Changing World of Work, Planning 50-50 by 2030. The Global Gender Gap Report, and ESCAP Executive Secretary already said, I want to quote Eleanor Roosevelt, that you don't know how strong a woman is until you put her. A woman is like a tea bag. You can't tell how strong she is until you put her into, until she's put into hot water. So we have had a lot of, negative data. But I would say that, the World Economic Forum has also reported that the gender gap in every continent has actually abridged. It's less gap. Even though in, Europe is leading in the Western Hemisphere, the gender gap is between 25 and 28%. In Middle East and, North Africa is the highest, it's 43%. But in Asia, it is about 30%. So we are not doing that bad. I'm looking at the Asia-Pacific region, and we're hoping this gap will continue to be abridged and abridged and abridged in the future. But at the same time, the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap reports that it'll take until 2086 to achieve Planet 50-50, another 170 years, so about 200 years. So business can't be as usual, and hence this year's, while the UN has chosen the theme Women in the Changing World of Work, Planet 50-50 by 2030, the NGOs who are observing International Women's Day have chosen Be Bold for Change. So we have to be bold for a better working world. That's the theme of the International Women's Day by the NGOs. So this is the theme, and we have to be bold, and we would expect in today's panel that they would be giving some bold suggestions, making some bold statements, as if they're from another planet. So let me introduce the panel. We have the pleasure and the honor of having Her Excellency Ms. Donika Potti, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Canada to the Kingdom of Thailand, Mr. Francesco Cos Montiel, Regional Advisor on Women's Economic Empowerment, UN Women Regional Office for the Asia and the Pacific, Ms. Johnny Simpson from the ILO, she's a Senior Specialist, Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination, and Mr. Mario Faro, co-founder and CEO of WeDo. It's a women's leadership development organization. And last but not the least, Ms. Siripon Pacharawat. She's the Director of Developer Experience and Evangelism, Microsoft Thailand. Let me just go back to, the Forbes Most 100 Powerful Women. It reports that, right now we have more heads of state. We have about 10 in Europe. Not in Northern America, though, but in Europe. And we have Asia's, closely following with 6 heads of state and government, followed by the, Latin American Caribbean region. There are actually most in the Caribbean region. There are 2 in Latin America, but more in the Caribbean region, and women are strong there. And in Africa, there are 2. And hence, even though 100 years back, women didn't have political rights to vote, now we have so many heads of government. The things are moving fast. But more importantly, in the private sector, there are more women CEOs, even though it's less than 5%, but it's reporting that the most powerful women are from the technology sector. And this is what the message is, that the world of work is changing. And we are challenged, the world is challenged, the women are challenged, because there's so much influence of technology. The executive secretary and the UN Women Regional Director both said the issues that are affecting the world, look at Europe, it's got a debt crisis. Look at Middle East and Asia, we've got refugee crisis, conflict-ridden Asia. And there are other threats to security, and people are moving from continent to continent, hence migration is a big issue. Therefore, all these climate change, all these issues are going to affect women's workplace. So let us focus and keep that in mind, in that backdrop. I would like to start with Ambassador Potti, and I would like to, just a little introduction. Ambassador Potti has been an original delegate to the Beijing conference, the real one, in 1995, and the original one, and that's where everything started, since 1910. And she is from the Canadian Foreign Service. She studied Asian studies, and she's also served extensively in Asia. She served in China, in Jordan, she was ambassador in Cambodia, and now in Thailand. Ambassador, as you know, that your country has been a champion of women's rights and gender equality and women's empowerment. You are a very handsome young Prime Minister. He just said that, Justin Trudeau, that this year Canada's theme will be women's empowerment leads to equality. In this backdrop, and we know that your, gender equality and empowering women is right at the center of your foreign policy and international development policy as well. What do you think? You've served extensively in Asia. What do you think are the main barriers and the challenges of women, and what are the successes that have been made, and particularly the barriers and challenges in having women brought to the work of world? What is standing in the way of their economic empowerment, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, and what is your government doing? What should be the governments who can help are doing in general also? Thank you.
So it's a big question, and I think that Miwa and Shamshad already addressed some of the barriers to women's full empowerment in work. So I don't want to go back over that ground, and I really am very attracted to the civil society Be Bold approach. So good, thanks for that. Canada has a Prime Minister who's a man, but openly a feminist, and language matters. I think there's barriers for women and there's barriers for equal opportunity if we shy around the language. And if we don't, and so it's great today to see so many men here, if we're sheepish about standing up for the rights of women. If we're sheepish as women, why would men stand behind us if we're not going to be active and forceful? I think women in Asia and women in my own country are socialized to be a bit self-effacing and to try a soft approach and to try roundabout approaches rather than to directly ask for what we believe we should have. And I think that's a barrier women face everywhere. Certainly that would be a barrier here as well. I think too that one of the areas we need to perhaps look more at are women who also have other barriers to full equality. So women from religious minorities or ethnic minority groups. It's a kind of double whammy effect. Not only are you a woman, and that makes it a little more difficult, but you're also, you also carry some other label that can make it difficult to access. This is what makes the SDGs so attractive. The idea that countries cannot say that they have achieved a goal unless disaggregated data shows that the most vulnerable groups have achieved the same goal. So I think we need to really hold countries to that. And I say this for my own country, this is going to be a challenge. We could easily meet many of those goals. You disaggregate for Canadian Aboriginal people, we're going to have trouble meeting some of those goals. So I think we need to really make sure that we disaggregate that so that some women are not left behind because they're carrying a sort of double whammy. In terms of other barriers, you know, while Asia is relatively conflict-free, it's not entirely conflict-free. And as we look at conflicts happening, for example, with in Myanmar and in other parts of, well, in Afghanistan, sort of further Asian environments from us in Thailand, I think we have to recognize that conflict sets back human rights. People are in survival mode, and that during peace processes, women are left out. And the evidence is overwhelming that women are left out. We've had 1325 in place for, what, 20 plus years, and women still are not included in peace processes. So it's something I think we need to all carry forward. But I want to be a bit positive. So, I mean, women have agency. And while some of the statistical measures are not where we want them to be, women do have voices. And we've all met very strong women, including women who have had limited education and who've had to really struggle to make opportunity. I think that efforts to recognize and highlight those models can be very useful, and I'd like to commend an event that the UN led on, I think at the end of January, called NPeace, where they found local community leaders that were nominated in parts of Asia, really working at the grassroots, brought them to Bangkok for training and for an award ceremony, tweeted about them. There were 5 million people that caught those tweets that highlighted these women all the way from Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Philippines. So I do think, and Indonesia, I do think that those sorts of efforts are worthwhile. We had a discussion with Miwa yesterday, the two of us and Miwa, where she spoke about the role of embassies, women ambassadors and women diplomats, and being role models. They're saying, here we are, you know, we did it, you did it too. And while that's attractive, and while I think that's part of how Canada tries to contribute, is by, you know, having 50% of our last outtake, a crop of ambassadors were women, 50% of our cabinet is women, is by sort of saying, here we are, we made it too. I think people need role models that are more easily identifiable. I'd say also on the positive side, I'm very attracted to the He for She campaign. It's a really nice way to seek men to champion and to be part of an effort to support women, both economic empowerment and in terms of addressing violence against women. I think it's something that we should really support. I don't know if I've answered all your questions in terms of what Canada's doing. So of course we support UN Women, and we've supported UN Women in this region. We're in discussions now about another phase. I think that's very important. We've supported efforts like NPeace, which I also think is important. I'm sure everyone, and we have local development funds that we use primarily to support small local human rights NGOs, including women's rights NGOs. When we do educational exchanges, we ensure that women are included. Where there's ASEAN-wide development programs, we ensure women need to be part of it. It's part of how we do development. And it's no secret that our development minister has made women and girls really the center piece of our development programming. So I think you'll see us doing more in this space. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We are very pleased to hear the commitment of the Canadian government, of yourself, being a woman ambassador yourself for 28 years. Oh. Well, you were ambassador from 2004 to 2007 in Cambodia. It's been a decade, more than a decade, you've been an ambassador. So we're very pleased to know, the role of Canadian government, how the ambassador has projected that our country wants more voice of women from the minorities. They shouldn't be quiet. They should actually raise their voice. She spoke about the peace and security, in the peace processes, to have a greater voice of women in Resolution 1325. And of course, Canada as a country supporting UN women's work. By the way, UN Women, I have, it's an entity, and I've always had a reservation on that. Everything else, it is specialized body-wise, UN Women, an entity. It's barely surviving, it sounds like that. So if any first opportunity we can vote for the General Assembly, we'll do that. And
I think we should, it sends a message.
thank you very much, Ambassador. I want to move on now to the next panelist, which is Mr. Francisco Cos Montiel, Regional Advisor for Women's Economic Empowerment, UN Women, Asia Pacific Office. Francisco brings positive changes into women's life for their participation and work in economic empowerment of women. And he supports with technical assistance in policy and program. He has been a senior civil servant from the Mexican government, worked in the finance ministry, women's ministry, and of course, foreign ministry. Francisco, with your experience, this is Asian century, we all say it. This is Asian century. There are like 4.2 billion people in Asia. It's growing at the rate of 7.9%, a phenomenal growth rate. And yet we, according to the ILO's report, the employment, well, generally global employment, unemployment is increasing. About 250 million people are unemployed. But more staggeringly in Asia, the unemployment of women are actually increasing. And women are less in the labor force, not only in the labor force, but also entrepreneurship-wise. So I would like to ask you that please give us your opinion, insight from your long years of work, that how can, we can provide more economic empowerment to women through employment, employment and ensuring that they get the backup policy and programs and support. Please.
You started by mentioning that Asia is a powerhouse of the world, and it's absolutely true. The region is the fastest growing in the world, but however, there is something that is very concerning about this region. And we have to look first at the global labor force participation, female labor force participation. For the first time since 1980, it has decreased globally from 50.2 to 9.6. And the result of this decline is because of Asia. It's because of the decline of the millions in India and the millions of women who have left the labor force and are not re-entering the labor force in India. So there is something very unique about Asia. In the rest of the regions, all the labor force participations are growing except in Asia. So there is something that we have to question there. If the growth that we have in the region, those amazing rates of 7% are actually bringing benefits for women. When we talk about inclusive growth, for me, the first measure of inclusiveness if it includes women. If it doesn't include women, it cannot be inclusive growth. So we have seen that two of the fastest growing economies in the world has some of the worst outcomes in terms of gender equality, measured by the ratio, by the sex ratio, the number of missing women, but also labor force participation. So to what extent growth is inclusive and empowering for women is something that we have to really discuss in Asia. In relation to what extent work is empowering, yes, work is very empowering, and this is one of the reasons why we want to see that labor force participation increase, but equally important is the quality of work. And equally important is the social protection that women can access to. Equally important is the sectors where women participate, the hours they work, and the benefits they can get to balance the productive and reproductive responsibilities. Because we have to be very honest, men, we don't do the same amount of hours that women do in terms of reproductive work. And this is one of the highest inequalities. I think we should fix that. But we have to agency and negotiation and renegotiation, daily renegotiation is extremely important. So what is also happening in Asia and the Pacific is that we are at the forefront of the technological change. But what we have observed is that as industries become more technologically intensive, they become defeminized. That means that women are dropping and men are getting those jobs. So in the future, you know, when garment industry and many of the industries that have driven growth in Cambodia, in Bangladesh, in so many countries, will be substituted by automation, then those women will be out. And if women do not have the capabilities, if women do not have the right skills and jobs, they will be out of the best job opportunities. And there is a huge gap because even in the United States, only 18% of women have access to ICT's degrees. No? Here in Thailand, and in many other countries, the average is about 5%, and Korea is 30%. So there is a huge gap, not only between men and women, but also between the supply and demand of jobs, because it's calculated at around 4 million jobs will be missing because of the lack of enough people studying ICTs. So my conclusion is that for women to participate and benefit from the growth that the region is experiencing, they need first to have social security. Social security is an incredibly important tool, and on average, the region only spends around 5% on social security. It's one of the lowest expending regions. Second, they really need to start living low productivity and low pay jobs and invest much more on those jobs that will be attractive in the future and that probably don't even exist now. As a World Economic Forum, many of those jobs don't even exist at the moment. And for me, the bottom line is that parity is the most important thing. If the public sphere is diverse and we are 50% men and 50% women, why the private sphere is not paritarian? Why do men do not participate to the same extent as women in the private sphere? For me, that's the bottom line.
Thank you very much, Francisco. You know, you have mentioned very pertinent points, and you really nicely summarized 3 very key points: that without skills and jobs, women cannot equip themselves for the jobs that don't even exist today. We don't know what kind of jobs are those, probably in planet Mars or Star Wars, but you know, we need to be equipped with those education, and it's absolutely scary that less than 5% women have access to ICT, perhaps in Bangladesh as well. And you know, definitely this is, in a technology-driven world, that is, I think, the huge barrier, and we need to remove that. And while we talk about equal you know, opportunities in employment, what about equal pay? What about equal pay, equal wages? And this brings us to the next topic, where I invite Ms. Johnny Simpson. She's the ILO's Senior Specialist in Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination for East and Southeast Asia, based in Bangkok. She has had a long and outstanding career at the ILO, community level, advocating women in entrepreneurship and micro-entrepreneurship. And she also provides technical guidance to gender equality, non-discrimination, and women's economic empowerment approaches to countries in the region. She's a specialist in women's entrepreneur development. She's ILO's global specialist, a coordinator in women's entrepreneurship development. We were just discussing that, you know, about wage gaps, equal opportunities, but then we know that we've heard from UN Women's regional director that women are severely underpaid, and 70% women are in the informal sector. Now, what do we do with these women? They are working day and night, but not getting paid. And the ILO report says that, you know, even by 2030, that is Planet 50-50, women will be earning 41% less than men. And this is, again, a very, very pessimistic figure and a very dark future. So how do you think, Ms. Simpson, that, you know, we can actually overcome these barriers? How can we ensure that women get, the wages are included, they get equal pay, and not only that, they get decent work and they get equal rights? So women's opportunities for work, wages, and labor rights. I would like you to reflect on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. it's as we speak, and there's been so much already said, I come down the line and I look at what I've written and I don't feel like talking to it. And I wanted to pick up just quickly on the world of work, this changing world of work. The ILO is the oldest institution of the United Nations, and we're coming up to a centenary. And the fourth convention of the International Labor Standards was about maternity. So on one level, you'd say, maybe at that time, the world of work was very progressive, even though it was probably, and I think if you look at the photos, yes, it was very much male-driven. But today's world of work, unfortunately, is still very masculine. And when we look at, and in my work, at looking at the infrastructures in the world of work, they are still very male-focused. If I look at labor inspectors, for example, thinking of a meeting I had recently in a country nearby, talking to labor inspectors about sexual harassment, which is a big issue in the region, but they weren't recognizing the fact that it was happening, nor were the women. So there are transformations to happen in the employment institutions, be that the ministries, the line ministries, the workers, the employers' organizations. And that leads me to one of the ways that I feel is very important to transform, and it has been mentioned, is women's voice and representation in trade unions, in collective bargaining, in policy dialogues. At the ILO, we're doing social dialogue tripartite style, but oftentimes in the room there aren't many women coming into, it was mentioned, going into a room and you're the only woman. This happens quite often. And so the good news is that our DG became he for she, of course, quite some time ago, and is also a gender champion, an international gender champion. It used to be Geneva Gender Champion. And there's been a commitment at the high-level forum on women's economic empowerment with the International Organization of Employers and Trade Unions to get to parity on representation. So that's really good news. That also makes me really excited, because we need to have more women's voices alongside men, to not only to get the issues raised that are important to women, but also to come out with the solutions that will be better for women and men. We know that it brings more innovation, more better problem solving, and I think that's one of the missing pieces that's advancing. So I think that's really actually pretty good work. I think collective voice is also something that used to be stronger. It's been a bit shrinking, and we were saying, you know, the NGOs told us to be bold. I think the voice of collectives is something we need to strengthen further, and collectives, I don't mean for any one institution. Of course, in the ILO, we would strengthen the voice and representation of trade unions, but just collectively, women and men collectively, I think we need to raise our voices more. I think the UN as well, we need to be stronger, and with bilaterals, we need to be raising those issues of human rights more often. It's a tricky time right now. The world of work is changing, and we need to be bold in that sense as well, to be protecting the rights that are there. I also just wanted to mention two key groups for me. Domestic workers were raised. The issue of work-life balance and care is critical for this region. Aging population, shrinking workforce. A lot of governments are really starting to tune in on that. And we have a huge opportunity that's a growing sector, but at the same time, the conditions of work are really poor in that sector. So I think on the one hand, there's a lot to be done if we could maximize that opportunity by driving through more quality work for domestic workers, and in particular for the rights of migrant domestic workers. And the ILO, of course, has a convention on this and lots of tools, as well as UN Women, and we've got collaborations going on that. So I really feel that they are our critical a group of workers that we really need to address the decent work deficits, because it'll have ripple effects and make a big difference in the world of work for women and men. And the other is women entrepreneurs. It was mentioned that the bulk of women entrepreneurs are in the informal economy, and they're not growing their businesses. But there's a big elephant in the room, is that we have business enabling environments that are not enabling and are not gender responsive. And if we could address some of those, rendering formality easier to get to. In fact, when we look at the mechanisms for formalizing a business, they are often shades of gray. And both women and men in an informal economy will be, by some measure, formal, but not fully recognized. So I think there's a big look to be taken there, and for women in particular, with having less assets, having perhaps less mobility, there are issues, a lot of issues that are gendered with regards to that. And then I guess I wanted to take a last moment for good news, is that today, well actually last night, the ILO published with the Gallup poll a new report looking at the perceptions of women and men about women's involvement in the world of work. So the good news is that both women and men in big majority want women to be working outside of the home. And I guess the number one issue that they brought up as a need was work-life balance and measures to enable that. So that's positive news, and I think that touches upon the norms and attitudes. So I think we need to start listening to that and putting that into action and being bold to get that in place in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Simpson. It's actually, the three areas that you reflected the most vulnerable. You spoke about domestic workers. You spoke about no voice or very little voice of women in trade unions and being absent from the tripartite dialogue. And of course, you've spoken about the migrant workers. And of course, the non-recognition in the macroeconomic policies of government. I don't know how to solve this. Perhaps ESCAP Executive Secretary is an expert on that. Perhaps she can go around the region and advocating for how to take informal contribution of women in the work, in the economy, transform that into a formal recognition. Because it is true that many sectors, even though we have microcredit in Bangladesh and there's a huge microfinance, but we are counting that in because we have a gender-sensitive budget. So that really helps of every little contribution that every little women organization for microfinance is doing. So, but then it has to be a region-wide effort. It has to be a global effort. Perhaps we are overlooking, continuing to overlook that. But it is true that every institution now wants to recruit women. But there are barriers. There are cultural barriers. There are institutional barriers. There has to be, the norms and policies would have to be changed. The CEOs want to take more women. They want to recruit women. They feel that women contribute more or equally. But there are barriers, and these are not glass barriers. We are talking about it. The Forbes is talking about it. How we have the top tech companies like Google, like Microsoft, Google and Yahoo and Facebook. We have powerful women on the tech companies, and yet we have so little ICT access by women. Women are not being equipped with technology, and that takes us to the next topic, which is technological change and the role of the private sector to promote women's economic empowerment in Asia and the Pacific. We have Ms. Siriporn, Director, Developer Experience and Evangelism, Microsoft Thailand, a brilliant woman leading in the private sector, or rather in the global corporate world, who leads a team of technical evangelists. And what are technical evangelists? I have no idea. Perhaps you can explain that to me. And audience marketers who run and drive activities to strengthen Thailand's local software and digital economy. And Thailand is a country that has a separate digital economy ministry. We have one too. Our Prime Minister has a digital Bangladesh vision, and we are very much in line with Thailand, see eye to eye on that. I'll take this opportunity to apologize to everybody. I'm not wearing black today. With all due respect to the late king, I'm wearing pink just to taking a break on the International Women's Day. I hope I'll be excused for that. Ms. Simpson also led Business Management and Operation Group of Microsoft Thailand, and according to, a very successful track record in Microsoft Learning. So I would request her that, You've already heard the data that, only 20% or 18% women have access to ICT, and less than 5% perhaps in Asia. I mean, most of Asia is underdeveloped. And what do you think, in your opinion, are the opportunities and challenges? How can we fast-track technological transformations for women at the workplace in the changing world of work? How can we interest women to learn more on the technology side and equip them? I mean, if I asked, I have three sons, but if I had a daughter and if I had asked her to go for computer science or computer programming, she'd probably say no. How do we interest this generation, to go for technology? And how can we use technology to break these barriers? Thank you.
Well, thank you. First, I'm very nervous, and I think I'm the only person from the public sector, private sector, sitting here with very, local experience. But I guess since I'm being one of the 5 siblings that is only girl, I'm qualified because I have been in domestic labor, being taken advantage of when I was growing up as well. And my mom was never, often on my side. So that earns my right here. Thank you. So pertaining to the evangelism and what I do is that Microsoft has a very strong belief that we cannot leave anybody behind, and that this team is tasked to help make sure that we bring technology access to everyone, to empower everyone. And when I look at all the works and the programs that I have run, and mostly locally here in Thailand, I deal with exactly this matter: how I entice the youth of today to be interested in studying science, like technology, engineering, and mathematics field of education, in short STEM. And when I run for the last 10 years here in Thailand, we run competition for software. And these are open to 16 years old or older students in STEMs throughout Thailand. We found that about 7% of the participants are female. And so the figure is not that far from the world's number of women's graduation in the ICT. And that's alarming, with what is being called now the Industrial 4.0, right? It is bringing a lot of, say, genetic engineering discoveries, new materials, and it's blurring the physical and biological and the digital transformation world. And so many businesses are being disrupted as a result today, and especially in the banking industry, where we have cryptocurrency. And so women being underrepresented as it is already would be, if they have no skills that are relevant in the future, they would be left behind for sure. And so, and World Economic Forum has also shared that in the next 5 years, the most growth in jobs would be in STEM, would require STEM skills. And so now, coming back to youth of today, yesterday Microsoft has just released a video that I would like to share, and it is speaking to technology and youth and women in particularly. Can you please show the video?
I'm really passionate about climate change. I'm worried that there won't be enough fresh water for everybody.
I want to make sure that we're able to have a self-sustaining environment.
My interest is to find a cure for breast cancer because my mom had it. Whoa! seeing stuff like this,
And I think I want to be able to help do that.
it makes me feel like unstoppable. Like,
That makes no sense to me. Like, why would that be?
There's always going to be someone that says, like, no, you can't do it. I think I can.
we're as amazing as men. Like, we can do as much stuff as they can.
I want my name to be there and be like, Marley is the one who helped stop this climate change issue.
I will discover a cure for breast cancer.
We need all hands on deck right now.
So with that, there are a number of myths that's deterring women and girls to enter into the STEM study. And some thought that STEM is only relevant in the higher education, which is, of course, not true. Many skills. Now, STEMs needs to be integrated into the education and learn as an integrated learning model. Also, the myth that is about men are better at STEM jobs in general. We do have women in the history like Ada Lovelace and Grace Hopper, who invented COBOL, who have invented meaningful innovations for the world. Plus, the myth is that STEM skills are only mattered for the STEM jobs, and which is not true. We know that studying science, technology, engineering, and mathematics promotes critical thinking skill and problem-solving skills, which are required for all jobs, especially all jobs of the future. So what do we do in a private sector, like a company like Microsoft? Microsoft has multiple programs, a few of which that I would like to just name is called the DigiGirls. And this is the program where Microsoft brings girls from all over within a country, right, like in the US. We bring girls together and tell them, about coding and get them interested. We have a massive program called USpark. USpark is a program where we drive technology access for everyone, the underserved communities, youth, and even older people who have no access to technology. In Asia Pacific, about 52% of the beneficiary of USpark programs are female. So we have a good representation there. We have reached out together about 190,000 individuals with that program. So with that, I think, and also a couple of days ago, I was just sitting on a panel like this at the UNESCO. It was the UNESCO Global Women Makes the News initiative. And the similar issue is being discussed. I think the points about role model is very critical. And because women's in the news that comes from STEM or ICT is very small and limited. And so I was imploring with the media that, that one action that you can take is to work a little bit harder when you need to feature some experts on the television or on the media, is to look for a female role model. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Siriporn. Very interesting perspective that we don't usually look at, because she's coming from the private sector. She's representing Microsoft, one of the largest tech companies in the world. And this is just so scary that, the STEM skills are not being nurtured into women. and girls. And I think this should be the theme of next International Women's Day, because we feel completely insecure and helpless. How are you going to cope with the future jobs? And the numbers are just not acceptable, you know, under 5%, under 7%, under 15%. I congratulate Microsoft for paying special attention to this area, and we hope that the other tech companies are doing the same thing. I hope they have it under their sleeves of the corporate social responsibility. I know Melinda Gates does a wonderful job worldwide, and I'm sure she's pursuing this too. Speaking of leadership, you know, we come to our last speaker on the panel, investing in women's leadership in the changing world of work in Asia Pacific. We have Mr. Mario Ferro, the co-founder and chief empowerment officer for WIDO, women's leadership development organization. Mr. Ferro is a former senior advisor for energy investments, Greenpeace, and a former senior consultant to Price Waterhouse Cooper. He actually represents the corporate sector in his past life, but now he's determined to bring women to leadership. And my question to you would be, if you look at Asia Pacific, we already said that we have 6 heads of government and state. And we do have few women in the corporate sector, from India, and then we have women in the sports, you know, but at the same time, you know, while we were more women, everyone's saying about role models. And I think, you know, if we have more women role models in Asia Pacific, and we can have an organization building this kind of leadership, yours could be the champion of that. So what would you say about removing obstacles and empowering, particularly economically empowering women across Asian Pacific? What would your organization do?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here, of course, and for the questions. And before going on the Asia side of the world, if you look at the general perspective of leadership, I'm very excited to see that there is more and more women in parliament, heads of state, and corporation, but yet we are still talking about less than 1 in 5 of members of parliament globally are women. We are talking about less than 1 in 10 heads of state. And interestingly enough, incorporation is the worst, lagging behind, like Fortune 1000, which are mostly Western, I agree, but just to take a benchmark, is like less than 7% as of last year of chairmen and CEOs are women. This number was 5% 2 years ago, so one can say 1% per year. Not bad, but 7%, guys. And this is 2017. I mean, how long more will it take? And when I think about those numbers, I'm really surprised, because we are talking about percentages, but when you think in terms of raw numbers, there are 46,552 members of parliament in the world. If we just wanted 50% women, that will be just 23,276. There are more women in 1 mile around this building right now. So I don't think that we're talking about a shortage of supply. If we think about CEOs of Fortune 1000, that's 1,000 people. We're talking about that the world hasn't been able to figure out 493 women to become CEOs out of 3.5 billion people. I think this is disgraceful. I don't think that this is, again, a problem of supply or competencies. When you go to that point in the ladder, there must be some major dysfunctionalities in the whole layers that are taking us to such a horrible result. When we think about, so WIDO was built on the vision of trying to get to 50% leadership in government, civil society, and business, small, medium enterprises, as well as large corporations. It's that simple. There's 50-50 in the world, there should be 50-50 in leadership. That's all. However, we started with Asia. So we're now working with young women that we call rising stars, just to give an encouragement from the start, that are coming from 22 countries in Asia. There's a little bit of everything. Lots of Southeast Asia, lots of South Asia. I have to say Bangladesh is one of the countries with the strongest representation in the program, which is very exciting. And the barriers that those young women, mostly in university age, between 19 25, median age is actually 26 in our program, quote, are financial barrier to higher education, which is a specific problem for the segment that we are working in, but if you look at the gender ratio in university, that's not necessarily a problem for the overall society. But the other two are much more interesting, I find. It is cultural barrier and actually lack of support network. And cultural barriers, you see them everywhere. I never forget when I was on a panel in Malaysia, at the end of the panel I was addressed by a Malaysian man who said, Mario, why do you do what you're doing? And I said, no, because statistics, you know, percentage is increasing with this. No, but you're wasting your time. Women cannot lead. That was it. This purely ideological, a random person in the street. These are voters. These are managers. These are people that when they need to choose who to vote and who to promote, approach that decision with such an assumption of a woman cannot lead. And what do you do with that? You know, where do all your statistics and theory go if somebody approaches it that way? A cultural barrier is something that we've seen, for instance, with one of our young rising stars. She's Cambodian. The first time we met her, she was 19 years old, and the family thought, you know, you are the fourth in the family. The most that you can do as the daughter of a rice farmer is to move up the ladder and find a very nice job in a garment factory outside Phnom Penh, where hopefully you'll be earning a very stable salary of $80 to $110 is more recently, and which is an improvement compared to being the rice farmer. She wanted to go to university. She met Widu. We were able to give her a scholarship to go to university. We matched her with a mentor that was supporting her and making her choices. And she was doing well. First year of university is a struggle. Come on, it was a struggle for everybody here, so let's not blame her. Second year was getting better. She becomes the head of a local society. Third year, she becomes involved with UN Women. Fourth year, she got a part-time job at one of the embassies in Phnom Penh, making as a part-time job twice what she would have made as a full-time factory worker outside of Phnom Penh. She graduates, gets a full-time job in another of the embassy in Phnom Penh, and she's now making 10 times that amount on a per month basis. She makes in 3 months what an average person in Phnom Penh makes in a year. And her family thought that the best that she could do was to go and be a factory worker. Now there's a number of problems that are going there. The cultural barrier that people just don't see what's the potential of a woman, which I find is disgraceful to begin with. But there is also the element that came up in a lot of other times. In her village, that's what women do. That's really a good improvement of being a fisherman or growing rice. So the lack of role model, it's staggering. And when a role model is a person, maybe it's prime minister, but with a certain surname coming from a certain family, that doesn't really work. It's not enough. One of the things that we are very excited now that a girl like Pierong represents an example in her whole region for all the other girls. Last time I went to their village, there was a 10 years old that came to me and said, I want to be like Pierong. Because she's your neighbor. She's the person you grew up with. Her parents are the parents you go when there is a normal meal or when there is a celebration. So I think that when we think about role model is also how can we foster a role model that people can relate to. It's incredibly important. And so the extra effort that we put on trying to get underprivileged women in the program, not just those, that will be a little bit easier if you want to meet our KPI to reach to bring to leadership position, I think it's particularly important. And so to all the civil society organization and to everybody here, when you're trying to empower women, try to have a segmented approach also by income, so that when you're doing your quotas, you make sure that every social layer is represented. And so for me, basically, the problem of trying to get more women into leadership position, and here is where the business background perhaps comes up, is really a problem of pipeline management. There is a certain number of women that we need to be able to have ready to take leadership position. There's 500 in the Fortune 1000, and there is 23,000 odds every 5 years, more or less, is an election for member of parliament. We need to make sure that every time every 5 years, we have these couple of tens of thousands of women, whatever is the success rate in winning an election, 1 in 5, 20%, whatever it is, we need to have a pipeline of enough women to make sure that enter the pipeline so that enough women get out of the pipeline. And that's why we get really practical we provide leadership training for people who aspire to government position. business position, we match them with mentors, which we are finding to be so much more important than giving a scholarship. The scholarship is necessary. The financing for education is necessary. But what we see being the biggest impact is actually in connecting with mentors that can work as a little bit as role models if they're in the same space, but really just sharing some advices. And so I really want to propose for everybody here, let's just do the math. How does this pipeline work? How can we diversify different layers, and how many people need to be trained in which segment to get to which outcome we want to have? It's something that I hope is going to work. I'm not sure if we're going to get, when we're going to get to 50-50, but I'm sure that we are going to get there. And I guess that to the men in the room, this is a little bit of an anecdote that I wanted to share with you guys. When we talk about role models, very often we talk about female role models that can be an inspiration for a young woman for what you can be in the future. But the reality is that role model can be also men. And we recently was on a panel in New York about a man that opens doors to women. Is a role model. That is a favorable bias for women. And if you are in a position of power, if you are the person that's deciding the bonus next time, that you are deciding the promotion next time, think about it. And if you are a father, like I presume many of us are, you are in an incredibly powerful position, because when you go home, you can wash dishes. You can make back the bed in the morning. You can cook every now and then. And when your baby is small, you can carry the baby around. I'm not saying as much as them. Women are stronger, let's face it. We are the weaker sex here. So I can't hold my 5 months son for as long as my wife can, but I can hold him a little bit. And this is the most impactful, I think, action that we can take at home. And it affects the mind. It builds new synapses in the brain. Builds synapses that build a different value system than you're going to use when there is that promotion decision to take, when there is an election to vote on. And that is something that I really made my my personal mission in the house. I have conference calls with my 5.5-month baby on my, what do you call it, carrier, I guess, yes. And I think it's important to share also those messages of men. I think that it's pretty manly to do that. I don't see that there is any problem in changing diapers, even every diaper. It's all right. And yeah, the pipeline management is something we can do organizationally, but being a better man in the household, I think it's something we can do just this evening when we go back home. And I really hope that different training programs like we do will emerge. And we're very eager to share the resources that we have with everybody here that would like to learn more about our approaches. And I hope that many of you will want to become mentors. Both the men and the women will want to become mentors for the incredible rising star that we have in the program. You will have a chance of seeing one of those girls at some point, not becoming just a staff in the embassy, but the ambassador one day. So let's just make it happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrow, for your inspirational talk. Definitely you're a he for she, and we look for more he for she's in this room. Perhaps we can start something at the ESCAP. Perhaps we can award or reward men who are doing more for women. And Executive Secretary needs to seriously take that into consideration. And especially men who'll open door for us. That sounds good. You have reflected on leadership, that, it's not only do we need women role model, it certainly helps. I know my Prime Minister is my role model. But it certainly helps women seeing other women in that top position. And when she's flanked by women, and just today, is International Women's Day. I've given many interviews in Bangladesh newspapers. And I just reflected on my memory that when I saw my Prime Minister, I went to the UN General Assembly with her about 5 years. She would be up, at 7 o'clock, she'd be fully dressed in a sari, and she'll call us to tell us that there are wrong data and statistics on her speech. And there will be secretaries of the government, senior officials. She's always one up. She always has accurate data. So this is a woman who can be a role model. And it's good to hear from UN Secretary General and President Obama that she's a woman who's playing a non-traditional, who's focusing on non-traditional issues such as zero tolerance and countering terrorism and extremism. That sounds good. So you look up to women role model. Women look up to women role model. Of course, they also look up to male role model, because every woman, if you interview them, it was their father. You said that, I'm going back to Kunsiripon, mother wasn't a help, but father definitely inspired you. So, we have the Thai ambassador in Bangladesh, who's a woman, and she's from Konkan. And, it's a huge environmental area and natural reserves. And her father has inspired her to be a painter. She's actually selling paintings for $300,000, like $4,000, 300,000 taka. So what I'm saying is that, that role model, being a father, can actually, that is where women empowerment starts, at home. When you have important men in your life inspiring you. Because to begin with, what Ambassador Donny said, that women sometimes actually fall into their own trap. They sometimes don't want to be empowered. And they need to break that stereotype. They need to be bold. They need to be brave. So we need to give them courage. And only that father figure can give them that courage. So fathers are very important. Brothers are very important. Husbands are very important. So, I will just summarize like this, that, Ambassador Donny, we have heard that, how developed countries such as yours, can provide more international assistance, more advocacy, to international organizations which are working on women's rights, as well as civil society organizations such as the UN Women. And you've also talked about how role models, prime ministers, male or women, can play an important role. Plus, you said that, how conflict-ridden areas, we need to pay special attention to conflict-ridden areas in the world and give more voice to women. I have also, you have spoken about partnerships, which are very important. I know that UN Women Regional Director is looking towards more partnerships. Without getting the hands together, without making a human chain, governments, international organizations, civil societies, individual women, philanthropists, and of course, the labor rights organization, human rights organizations, we cannot, and the private sector, very important player, actor, enabler, who has the capacity to change, because it's not only the governments who can do everything, the private sector has to. That's why there's a UN private-public compact. So everyone has to, we have to build these partnerships to achieve that Planet 50/50. Also, we have had views about, in the employment sector, how to create equal opportunities for employment of women. And, it has to be government doing policy. There has to be quotas for women. There's just no other way. Of course, I personally believe that women should always come into job through merit and merit only. Otherwise, they get undermined. But at the same time, like you said, until, women has to be in the pipeline. And, we have to be making future leaders through training, through skill development. And particularly, if we don't, at this point in time, Bangladesh has 50 seats reserved in the parliament for women. Now, they're not directly elected, but they do go for direct elections after 5-year term, and they do get elected. So, you have to give them that break. So we need to have equal opportunities policy-wise in the employment sector. And then we come to the labor standards and the equal wage in the new working world of women. And it's not easy to ensure that, but when it comes to government job, I can assure you we all have equal wage. I don't pay any less than any male ambassador. But the thing is that in the private sector is a huge issue. So, I think starting from the informal labor sector, what Ms. Simpson has spoken about, that there has to be protective policies, protective legislature by government to protect vulnerable women groups and to ensure, such as domestic workers and migrant workers. But at the same time, we have to ensure they get minimum wage. Minimum wage is an important issue. And more voice in the labor, in the trade unions. we have to create a quota that if there's a labor union, 1/3 has to be women. In Bangladesh, we have this in every single sphere of life. We have it in local government, in union level, at the parliament, everything is 1/3 now. There has to be a women voice. It's just compulsory. The Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, has made that. So that particular ensuring that, you have to employ women, you have to provide them equal wage, that depends on the governments and also private sector. And civil society definitely, and the labor unions and trade unions can play a very important role there. And coming to the Missouri point, Microsoft, the private sector, it's like we said, I would like to suggest, if anybody else would like to, that the next theme should be STEM. There's just no other way. It is absolutely scary to feel how unskilled we are. We are just not ready for the future world. And that is why World Economic Forum has said that getting talent 50-50, it'll take another 200 years. This is why it'll take 200 years. It's very clear. There is no way we can sit around and waste time. It has to be immediate. It has to be through education policy. Private sector would have to, I think the government is sleeping. You have to wake them up. So I think there is a huge role that the private sectors have to do in the tech industry, because, we are so disconnected to the tech industry. I mean, it's a huge issue that we have a social media and a Facebook of the embassy, and we think, oh, we have a great social skill and, tech skill. But even the person who's supposed to upload the photo doesn't know much in the embassy. It's a huge challenge. So definitely we have to ensure that women get the STEM. Education, UNESCO, government, civil society, any private sector organization, I don't know how to go about it, but UNESCO and UN Women could come up with a joint plan, and definitely should be working with Microsoft and other private sector. Otherwise, you can't wake the governments up. And Melinda Gates has to go around, campaigning for this. I think you should sensitize her. And the last is, the political leadership. We've spoken about leadership. I already said about leadership. Leadership matters. It has mattered to me. My role model in my family to inspire me has always been my father. I've gone to an engineering university. I was good in maths, and you're absolutely right, as critical thinking, everything helps, if you're good in STEM. So at the end of the day, I would just like to summarize that, for economic empowerment of women, we have a long way to go. Let's just face it. But we have achieved so much, and if we can achieve all those women in the pipeline, 7%, and 10% in the global leadership in heads of state, heads of government, we can, like you said, incremental. Everything has to be incremental. We can't achieve everything in one day. But I think that skills for women is the #1 criteria for economic empowerment. Education in general is the #1, a very important criteria. We don't need to have quotas in jobs. We need to have quotas in the educational institutions if need be. But we don't want, affirmative action if it's not necessary, because that really makes your dignity slightly hurt. But in educational sector, if need be, women, minorities women, poor women, financial assistance, all those incentives have to be there. Otherwise, we can't create leaders for tomorrow. So for economic empowerment, Asia Pacific, we have to look into the labor sector. We have to go advocate. ILO has to play a role in advocating governments and how there has to be equal opportunity in every industry. But more importantly, where are the women who are going to be employed there? They need an education. So I think I will end there, that for economic empowerment, the executive secretary mentioned about very sensitive issue, which is inheritance rights, equal access to finances. So equal access to finances, we touched a little bit on that. It's really, really scary as well. Women don't even get 15% in a country of financial aids, loans, credits. Microcredit is playing an important role, but we have to actually get women to get education. Next step is get them to employment. Next step is get them to entrepreneurship and jobs. And of course, we have to advocate with governments, particularly Muslim countries, that how we can ensure equal inheritance, how we can ensure equal access after divorce, for example. So these are important issues, but we just have to continue the dialogue, keep our voices heard, strong. And I will just end with a quote from Malala Yousafzai, who's a woman from South Asia, exceptional young woman. And my salute to her. She said, "We cannot all succeed when half of us are held back." And I feel we are held back by lack of technology. I'm feeling it right every moment now. So not only do we need to be held back, shouldn't we be held back from education, but not from technology? So I will end today's dialogue, interactive dialogue with that. I would like to thank the ESCAP Executive Secretary and UN Women for organizing this. We enjoy this talk every year, and I certainly hope that it will not remain only as a panel discussion. I hope both the organizations, through the RCM mechanism, would do something to have more talk on that, because ESCAP has just initiated the ICT committee, and I think that this should be the focus in the ICT committee, at least for the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our very talented moderator and all our panelists. It's a pleasure to have heard you speak, and thank you to all of you for being here. You're welcome to have some refreshments outside. So again, in conclusion, much appreciation to you all, and let's work one way or another to ensure gender equality. Thank you.